Welcome to the show, everybody. Michael with CoronavirusDiaries. Today, I'm fortunate enough to be able to speak again with Linsey Williams, a non-commissioned officer in the Public Affairs Office of the Minnesota National Guard. Linsey, how are you?
I'm doing well, Micah. Thanks for having me.
Great. I appreciate you coming back on. Seems like every time we talk, there's a little bit more interesting developments in our community and nationally, globally, in lieu of COVID and everything else. But before we get into any of that, you had recently had an annual training for the Minnesota National Guard. You might share a little bit about kind of what that was like and what it was about?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I work at a division headquarters. So for us to have a training period where there was really only a fraction of us there because this year is such a busy year for the Minnesota National Guard that all of our people are going and supporting these different exercises in different places. So it was kind of nice that there were so few people up there at Camp Ripley. And it was really just back to basic soldier tasks and battle drills and spending whole days out at the range. And it was
Right.
really nice in that respect. I mean, still busier than your average bear, but it was just nice. I mean, as nice as an annual training can be, I guess, which is a weird way to look at it, but it's definitely one that I'll treasure because we probably won't get one like that for a while.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I enjoyed the training out there. It's my understanding is one of the largest National Guard training facilities in the U.S. Per
I think
land.
so.
Yeah, it's pretty good. We did our tank gunneries out there, so big things getting shot long distances. It's good times.
Mhm.
You'd mentioned some movements that are happening. So there's some Minnesota Guard units that have recently deployed and that are coming up to deploy, and it sounds like it pertains to security operations, global security operations in some capacity. You'd mentioned something about Africa.
Yeah. So our Second Battalion, 135th Infantry Regiment. They are, along with a couple of troops from Iowa and Second Brigade, the 34th Infantry Division, as well as I want to say it's either Illinois or Indiana. I'm pretty sure it was Indiana, but another platoon of troops. All of them, just shy of 1,000, will be headed to the Horn of Africa, stationed primarily in Djibouti, but also with contingencies in three other countries. Mainly working a security mission over there. Djibouti has a large port, and there's countries all over the world use it to import, export, valuables, oil, whatever. And so that'll be one of the missions, and then around the area in support of AFRICOM, the African Command, U.S. Africa Command. That's the mission of this Task Force Bayonet. And yeah, they'll be doing that for about 9 months. But to date, I think that's the largest contingency of Minnesota National Guard troops that we'll have on the continent of Africa. So
Wow.
Minnesota National Guard has been all over the world doing all kinds of missions and has all kinds of partnerships with other nations. But yeah, I think this one with Africa will be a big first. So good for 2135.
Yeah, represent. So we were talking a bit before we started the session about security. I'd share with you Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's these elements to humanity, essentially, like the fundamentals of the lowest level: food, water, shelter, warmth. The next one up is security. Um, the Horn of Africa and these places that these Minnesota National Guardsmen and women are going, needing security. What's your thoughts or opinions on the security that's there or the lack thereof, or like what? I think you mentioned some training elements of the troops that are going over there.
Yeah, so one thing that I mean isn't necessarily unique to the Africa mission, but in so many ways, our U.S. forces usually work side by side with the nations that we're being hosted in working on um, techniques, tactics, and procedures, and just those basic military skills, just so that their forces can be able to handle the security missions that come up for them, or that if something pops off and we need to work together, that we understand each other and that we can work side by side.
Yeah. So I can only imagine the challenges that would present themselves working in an environment with like a port on the Horn of Africa where there's so much containers moving in and out and people moving in and out. The security initiatives that would be necessary there. But even here in our own state, recently you had an experience deploying in our own state in some capacity with your units for security operations around the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We talked a little bit about this in the previous session, but interested on your take, how it was received and amongst those that were actually deployed, as well as any of the folks that you came in contact with, just purely based on the sentiment that's widespread now regarding law enforcement throughout the state and the nation.
Yeah, it was interesting because that was one of the things I had the opportunity to do was to actually kind of go to different locations around Minneapolis, around the Twin Cities, and just kind of have an opportunity to talk to the troops a little bit and ask them, well, how's it been for you at this location? What have you seen? What have you heard? And, you know, kind of earlier on in the security mission, kind of closer at, that Friday, Saturday time frame when things were kind of just
Burning still?
really heated. They were
Yeah.
still burning. There was a little more heat and aggression towards our troops, just for being out, just for being in uniform, carrying weapons, and but really they were just there to protect, places and work side by side with people who were just trying to quell the situation. And as the days passed, people realized, well, we're only here to, defend others. We're here to protect property and protect people and make sure that nobody gets hurt. We don't want to have to engage in any other way. That's just what we're here for. And I think people started to realize that and see that. And it didn't take long for people to just really express a sort of appreciation and gratitude towards our troops for just being regular people. Yes, we're wearing a uniform, and yes, we're armed, and we have these big, armored vehicles that we're driving around the cities. However, I mean, this is our home too, and we don't have any reason to want to harm anybody. That's certainly not our mission. And so, that being the case, I think people started to see that and understand it. And actually, there was one location. There was the Cedar Foods grocery, which was basically the only one in a 2-mile radius that hadn't been looted or burned down or, accosted in some way. We had soldiers out there for days, and I went there one night and I saw that the shop owner had allowed, the guys to go in and take naps on the floor when they did their shift changes. And then I went back a couple nights later, and someone from down the street, I guess he owned a restaurant, he brought them like plates of food and like good, authentic, I don't know what kind of food it was. It was some Latino food, and I don't want to like get the actual nation wrong, but it was delicious. It was fantastic. And it was so sweet of them that they, appreciated the gesture and that the work our guys were putting in. And I was out there one night just talking to the guys, and a woman pulled up. She's driving, there's a stoplight, so she stops, and then she yells to her guys, and she says, "How long are you gonna be here?" And this young Joe, he's maybe 22, maybe, he just says, "As long as we're needed, ma'am." She says, "Oh, okay, thanks, we appreciate you." She was kind of glad that, it was these guys and not the police, but I feel like they're kind of our civilian counterparts. We're brothers and sisters in uniform, even if our uniforms look a little bit different.
Sure. Yeah, I can see the like Law and Order. These places that guard and military deploying to help stand up security in these completely lawless environments. Before we had started this, I'd shared a little bit about there was an experience in Iraq where tribal warfare, when when it comes down to, there is no law enforcement. The military isn't really out there to help. They're just trying to hold the country together. It comes down to small little pockets, and even there, it turns into tribal warfare, where it's just whoever's got the most force. And we saw a little sneak peek at kind of what could potentially happen in the States if this were to develop with the encampment in Seattle, Chaz, or they had a few different names for it, but it eventually devolved into lawlessness, where people got killed. There was rapes and there was violent crimes that happened within this so-called, it was kind of like when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's kind of like they're trying to have a demilitarized zone or something. Or, but then suddenly there was armed personnel, and there's like a militia, and then like, oh, okay, wait. And there's an interesting paradigm in that trying to do away with one thing ends up creating another. And which lends itself to what we had talked about before this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how we're seeing a lot of this, a common term that many people may be familiar with is Karens. Apologies to all those Karens out there that have
to. You're bad. That's my mom's name. And look, she's a nice lady. She cares. All right.
Yeah, I feel so bad for anybody named Karen right now.
Yeah, I know 2 Karens, and they're both very nice people.
It's so funny though. Like there's the memes and some of those videos. I mean, there's, it just lends itself. It's just, this terminology, but you made the comment about, do you think people are getting so bored, or they're so comfortable because they have, like, there is a group, there's quite a few people that have all the physiological needs: food, water, shelter. They have security. They have relationships of some kind, esteem, and, self-actualization being the top of the pinnacle. But getting to the point where having all this other stuff, and it becomes such commonplace that suddenly you just start looking for things. And this is not to suggest that there isn't systemic inequalities. Obviously, there's quite a few that have been addressed and need to be delved into. But like calling the police on people that are like bird watching, a little bit ridiculous. Like not a little bit, a lot of it ridiculous. But kind of lending itself to where everything is at right now is just privilege, maybe a little bit, and then there's when there is secure, when you do feel secure in your environment, and you have all your necessities and all the things, you're experiencing a totally different life than somebody that may not have that stuff readily available.
So yes, my worry is that, for those who have a set life, who are very comfortable, and then they want to, it's one thing to embrace your freedom as an American. It's another thing to want to do whatever you want without impunity, even if you're doing the wrong thing. And I think that's a fine line that, it shouldn't be that fine of line, but we've almost blurred that line at this point. And that's something that I get really concerned about. And the same with, the idea of defunding the police. People can have all the discussions they want about, what's the right answer. It's not for me to decide. I don't know. It's going to be put to a vote, and I encourage everyone, just please go vote, but please arm yourself with knowledge before you do it. I think that's the best thing we can do at this point, and that's what I encourage people to do. But I think we need to, understand, well, if I'm coming to this opinion, where am I coming to this opinion from? And what life am I living where I think that this would be the right way? Is that the same for someone who might be in a completely different socioeconomic status?
Right.
And I think there are some things that people aren't really considering when they spearhead certain charges. So,
case in point, the defund the police movement is led to, it would appear that there's some increased crime in areas where communities are trying to refrain from, having law enforcement involved in their communities. And there's private security now being utilized, which is a very interesting concept, which will be interesting to see how it plays out. And I, for one, I might go sign up if they're paying good enough. Why not? It's a crazy thought, doing some sort of security operations armed in a community. You're going to be in a uniform, but it's just a different. It's a privatized
What are you doing
uniform.
with like 3-month-old crime that you want to report? Is that something that private security is going to hit? Like, do private PIs that are
Right. And that's, there was multiple rapes or sexual assaults that just happened over in the Powderhorn community, the encampment that's been developing out there. Who's going to go and pursue the investigations into these crimes? One of them was a kid, I mean, if there were no police officers, is there a private security unit that's going to be, or missing children, or, whatever it is, there's a lot of things that, the law enforcement community has to deal with. Yeah, that's a pretty big topic, though. It's one that I'm actually struggling with for the piece that I talked to you about, and hoping to wrap up here soon. It seems like the longer I let it go on, the more topics come into play, and it makes it more difficult for me to rein in the amount of information that is within the piece. So, but yeah, I can't thank you enough. Was there anything that you had wanted to touch base on or share before I let you go?
Yeah, when you talked about us being called out to the state active duty mission, and we were responding to civil unrest, there have been plenty in our organization who have responded to flood fights, and there have been people who go fight wildfires in other parts of the country as well. And I feel like you can't write off the position of the Minuteman even in today's society. And don't get us confused with Joe Schmo militiaman over here who wants to start his own crew.
Right.
Absolutely not. We're not that guy. We're people who live here, work here, and serve here. And as much as that's a recruiting slogan, it's true. Yeah. And I was hanging out with a soldier who was trying to close up shop when his O'Reilly started getting looted. And then a day later, he had to put on his uniform, and he's out, protecting the city of Minneapolis, sleeping on those streets with his brothers and sisters. And that's the kind of thing that we do. And we're here to protect you guys. We're here to protect our home. And that's important. And I'm glad that we have such a great, network of community support here in Minnesota. It's very unlike most of the rest of the country. And, we probably wouldn't be nearly as strong in number and in our, continued commitment to service without that. So I just want to put that out there. So
that's everyone. Great insight is the Minuteman, the localized, being ready to defend your community, and focusing on your neighbors and your family, and it goes a long ways. I know, for as divisive as everything has been, in the middle of watching neighborhoods burn, seeing professional soldiers on the streets, that I valued their decision making because they were trained, and because of the leadership. It was a pleasant sight to see that. It just made me think of being when I had gone myself overseas, is when you would go into the communities that didn't have they didn't have law enforcement. They had, the dads had some old rusty Kalashnikovs or some other ancient rifle that may or may not even work. And there's a handful of them in these small communities. Well, I mean, you saw what happened when ISIS rolled in. They just swarmed, took over. They made the women do whatever they wanted, and a lot of bad things happened. Kids became child soldiers or slaves, and without law and order, it devolves rapidly. And that was a pretty big concern for myself when I was watching it. Like the fires just creep across the community, and the stores get destroyed. So I don't know. I guess for anybody that's never been to a war-torn third world country, it's even, you just can't, right? When I came back, the commander was like, yeah, if anybody's asking you questions, just tell them it's like trying to explain the color red to a blind person. Like how? Like you can't. Like they gotta smell it, and they gotta feel it, and they gotta see it, and without that, it can be pretty easy to look at things that are around here and just try to. It's a big complicated mess that we got out here, and it's good to know that there's some professionals that are still willing to stand the line between right and wrong, and thank you for your service and for all the others as well. So with that, Linsey, I appreciate your insights and you sharing your time. For all the guests and listeners, stick around, we got more coming at you.